Well, they're good at what they're good for. Yeah, yeah. I don't have any, I don't have any. There's all kinds of different ways to achieve different ends. Yeah. Okay, so with your permission, we could do an ATM, and that would be nice, or we can just take the time to just sort of for the last hour and a half, just begin to look at something about lifting the head. If you're okay with that, you're okay. It'll again, it's a different kind of attention, but okay. So, what are the different potential movements of a person's head? Okay, we have the potential movement of nodding. Okay, forward to back in the sagittal plane. Okay, what else? Okay, so we have two ways of going side to side. We have rolling, which means that there's a translation, and rotation, which means we move around an axis. Yes? Okay. So we have lateral flexion. Yeah. So we have lateral flexion. So if you're in India, this is yes. Yeah. Okay, good. So we have the pecking movement. We have translation, forward and back. Yeah. Translation forward and back is different than, yeah, okay. Yeah. So we have this other translation, side to side. Now, of course, any of these translation movements could be done into any plane, right? I mean, do I give myself this half a horizon here, and then I can make the movements into any place. Yeah. Okay, so I have translation. Okay, what else? Okay, I have traction, so I have the ability to increase the distance. So a sense of traction. Yeah. What else? Compression. Okay. Are we happy with that? With that lot of all those possibilities? Okay. So now I want to talk to you about a rationale for lifting a person's head that's somewhat different than what you find in the Feldenkrais world. Okay? And I'll explain that, hopefully with enough details that you'll be able to understand the rationale. Okay? First of all, though, let's take a look at the way that the head, I'm not going to put an atlas here, but the way that the spinal column comes and the head joins the spine. And so we can understand that this point has the potential that if I start to lift the person's head from here, that puts a tremendous ask on the musculature of the head, the musculature of the neck to support that junction. Yes? So if I'm holding the head here and I start to lift, then I'm asking all the musculature, the upper cervical musculature that joins the spine to the head, yeah, to provide that support over that surface, even though clearly I have condyles on the lower condyles on the skull relative to the very nature of the way that the atlas is formed. Yeah? Maybe I will do this. Aha! You don't have one? You don't keep the atlas and the axis in your pocket? God, what kind of person are you? What's that?
Only on Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Only on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So here we have the axis and the atlas. And so when we look very carefully at the atlas, we can see that it's higher in front than behind, and for a very good reason. Why? So how is it, as you know, so if I attach this to the skull here, so if I attach this to the skull, that more or less, I'm going to keep the atlas out of there for the moment. So more or less, this engagement in the front makes it so that it's going to be a little bit harder for my head to fall forward, isn't it? Just a little bit. And why do I need it to have it so that my head doesn't fall forward? I have two reasons that my head doesn't fall forward. Yeah? Because you see, if you look really carefully, you'll see that the atlas comes into the skull about a third of the way in. The head is not balanced perfectly over the atlas. It's not forward and back. And how is it that I lift my head for so long and don't sense? Because I'm having to lift the weight of the front of my skull without ever knowing that somehow I've tonified myself so that I'm not holding my head up. How come? What am I utilizing? I must be using some kind of muscular process that can act and fatigue and recover quickly. So I must be able to use those very long, slow twitch muscle fibers along my back that are built to help maintain me to be upright in such a way that I don't experience effort. Yeah? And there are all kinds of ways in which the system anticipates, the way that it maintains its pillar response, the way it maintains its uprightness, the way that it finds the simplest way to be supported in such a way that volitional movement then can arise out of it, rather than having to utilize my phasic musculature to do the support that could be done in the most simple way, if I was to continue to go through that apprenticeship with myself. Yeah? All right. So the head sits on the skeleton more or less a third of the way back, with the major part of the weight forward, and the brain, the head has to be sitting in such a way that the musculature can tonify in such a way that we don't know it's working, except for when we do, which we don't want it to have happen. But this musculature maintains the tone within ourselves to keep our teleceptors at the highest point possible. Biologically, what is my advantage to have my teleceptors at the highest point possible? I can see further. What else? Huh? I can fall in any direction. I have the higher that I am, the easier it is to find the purity of the ability to rotate around myself. Yeah? So you take this really big muscle that comes to the mastoid process, then it attaches to the clavicle, and it attaches to the sternum, right? This big muscle. This one that attaches here. So if I want to turn myself to the left, which mastoid process, which sternocleidomastoid muscle works? The one on the same side or one on the opposite side? On the opposite side. So this muscle, so if we can imagine this, that there's a muscle between the mastoid process and the clavicle and the sternum, that as that muscle contracts, as it gets shorter, the distance between the mastoid process and the clavicle shortens as the muscle belly engages. Yeah? So I'm turning my head to the opposite side. So this is a major stabilizer for myself. It does have a part of a function to side bend, but for the most part, this is the way that I make the movement. Now, if I have engaged myself in such a way that the muscle is shortened, the amount of work that the muscle can do is significantly less, isn't it? So as soon as I have the entire length where my head sits at the highest point on the spine, then obviously when that muscle contracts, I can have the greatest movement, the greatest possibility to take in the environment with the absolute least amount of effort, right? So we have to me, I think we have to really think in the organization of the carriage of the head. Now, how am I going to utilize my hands to touch someone in such a way that I maintain, when I lift their head, this availability? Can I touch someone and lift their head in such a way that in my hands, every single potential for movement is available without having to change my hands? Aha! Now, doesn't that create a kink in this whole system? Yeah? Doesn't that create a conundrum for us? Yeah? Because, now, you see what kind of a mind I have. I'm too lazy to have to move my hands around, right? So I want to figure out, is it possible for me to hold someone in such a way that every single potential is available to me without having to change my hands? Now, so when we examine this, and we examine this against the way that people normally think of lifting someone's head, I hope I don't scratch the table or anything. The center of gravity is through the where in the head. And for the most part, what do people do? They put their hands under the center of gravity. Yeah? Now, I can make some movements with the head from here, but I can't make all of them. Yeah? Now, and I can demonstrate that and show you. But for the most part, I also, if I keep the weight under my head here, I have created the conditions where this person must tonify their upper cervical spine to keep their head from sagging. Even though the atlas is there to give a little bit of support, you can imagine that you would not build a bridge where you have an abutment and you bring the bridge to the abutment. You would probably build the bridge in such a way that it would go over the abutment, right? It would be a really bad bridge if you were going to put a lot of weight to the abutment and have this butt joint, right? Now, so if I lift this, I'm depending upon that abutment to provide the support. And I can guarantee to you that if I lift this, that at that point in time, there's a change in the tone of the neck. Yeah? So now, how am I going to alleviate that? Where down to? Okay. Yeah, well, we can do this. We put one hand here, and we put one hand under the neck, which we often do. Yeah. Okay. So I think it's a good enough beginning. Well, we could do a whole thing on the neurology of the inner ear and the vestibular system and the balance centers and all kinds of things here, but I think we'll just leave that for just a moment here. All right. So thinking of a number between, we need a plastic bag or a bag full of names and we could randomly draw someone. All right. Someone who wants to come and lie on the table here for a moment? Yeah, good. All right, great. All right. Now, this is my unfair advantage, right? Because you see, I have no trouble straddling the table. I have no trouble being as close to the weight that I'm going to lift as possible. And even though, just take that out of the way. Can I have this, a different stool than this? I need one that has more. Where's the other wooden stool? No, that'll work. That'll be okay. That'll work. That's okay. The world was never built for me, so I have to have the means within myself. Am I sitting or am I standing? I don't know. What is it? Feldenkrais could take 3 pieces of paper and sit down and lift himself to the point that you could take the middle piece of paper out. Yeah? I do not have that level of skill. Now, you think now and you watch, so you might have to come around so you can see. You think of this point where her atlas joins her spine, and you think for yourself that if I take my hands behind her and I support her in the way that we normally support someone, what's taking place? Now I can bring my fingers up and under and provide support into the atlas and into her neck. But if I simply support her at this point, the immediate ability to rock her head is inhibited. It might be because that's something I'm discovering or something about her, or it might be that systemically there's some way in which her system isn't free to make the movement. And the weight of her head is falling between my hands. That weight, so what do I have to do with my hands to hold the weight? I have to increase the tension in my hands to hold the weight. The more I increase the tension in my hands, the less capable I am of sensing what is available to her. Yeah? Now, over here on this side, you can see we have the mastoid process. Where does the atlas rest? The mastoid process. Here's where you take your fingers and you go along your ear and you come down and you find the very tip of the mastoid process for yourself. So you have a very clear sense of relation. Here's where you find the front of the mastoid process. You put your fingers behind the mastoid process so that you can rotate your head and change your fingers so the mastoid process in front, fingers in front, the mastoid behind, so that you can start to change and you could start to find the mastoid process as a way from which you could rotate your head on the atlas. Yeah? Yeah? Thumb and finger. And of course, with that, then you could find the most central line and the sense of lift so that you're rotating to, in your estimation, the purest way possible. You can find out as you go whether your eyes want to look down or look up. Which side do your eyes look up? When do you look down? Because it's very clear for me, when I go to one side, I'm up, and the other side, I'm down. It's just... Is that true? As soon as you find the place that's not right and not left, and then when you go to the other, okay? So where does the atlas rest relative to the mastoid process? The atlas, if you were to locate the atlas relative to the front of your face, where would the atlas be? How high, where would it be? Where would you point to the front of your face if you were going to find the atlas? If you've ever been to a chiropractor who does upper cervical adjustments, what pictures do they take? Through the mouth. Yeah. So the roof of the palate. May I have that skull? So if we could take this and we could come here to the very roof of the palate of this, the roof of the palate is more or less at the level, at the height of the condyles in the occipital area of the head. Yeah. So the top of the roof of the palate is more or less, if you were to point through, then that's where you would find the atlas. Yeah. So the atlas, what did I do with my, sorry. I think it's really important that you become more and more, that you know how to ask the questions. It's not to just look at the book, but you ask these questions. What? Yeah. Where am I?
If I put my fingers in my ears and they meet in the center, will I find the atlas?
No. That's too high. Yeah? Because take a look. Where's the whole of the ear? Where is it relative to the mastoid process? Yeah? Where is the atlas resting? Yeah? So the atlas is more or less resting, and it depends on the person, but sometimes it can be inside the mastoid process, and then every person is slightly different, or it can be resting slightly down. But there is this relationship between, wake up. Sorry. There is a relationship. Oh. There is a relationship to where it is that the mastoid process, the lateral wings of the atlas rest. And of course, there's whole worlds in the whole world of chiropractic that if you're slightly out of adjustment and you're slightly twisted by a few degrees, then you see it changes the space for the brainstem. Yeah? And so the whole world of upper nuca, upper cervical chiropractic, which Robert Cowan, who was in the Sydney training that I worked with, who was an upper cervical chiropractor from Wollongong, who was a lovely man, who once gave me the opportunity to give the most lessons I ever gave in a day. He brought me to his practice, and he arranged for me to give 17 lessons in a day. He booked me every half hour. I might say I was blitzed at the end of that. Yeah. But he and I had many, many discussions about this. Yeah. And I was really fortunate that I had the discussions. But so then when we really look at this, then we can say, well, even how would I go about finding, if I wanted to palpate the ends of the atlas, the transverse processes of the atlas, how would I palpate it? How would I make, what would I have to do to make that bone stick out so I could find it? That can't be the case, could it? Right? If I slightly side bend her and I tilt her head this way, wouldn't something be available here? Right there's the tip of the atlas. Yeah. I can reach behind the atlas, I can reach the front of the atlas, and I can actually touch the atlas. And it's very interesting. When you learn to palpate the atlas, most people you'll find it's very sore. Side bend, roll, side bend a little bit, and the atlas is right there. And some people are just so easy to find, and other people you're sitting there going, she's very easy to find. It's like it, oh. See, I'll tell you these stories and then you'll never forget. So I was fishing in Australia, or not in New Zealand, and I'm with a guide. And the guide, this may not be appropriate. So the guide says, you see that fish in the river there, mate? No? No, mate, the fish, it's right there. Looking into the depth of the river, I don't know, I'm looking, it's like, if you're with a hunter, someone who really knows how to hunt, they pick out the details out of the environment that's somehow an anomaly. Some little shape, some level of, some shadow, something that's an anomaly, that's not a part of the, what's the word? No, what's broccoli, what's the,
Flora.
no, the,
Foliage.
that's good, but it'll come to me next week. Okay. So I look, and he says, mate, the fish is right there. Mate, it's sticking out like dog's balls. The atlas at this point in time is sticking out like, huh? No, no, that was New Zealand. Huh? He would have. Well, I thought it was a Kiwi thing because he had colloquialism. I mean, he had stuff. Okay. So can you see how I'm making all these movements to locate where I am again? Yeah. Now, if I make this movement, I can find this way in which my thumb can find a perfect point of support under the mastoid process. Now, if I find this place where my thumb, this part of my thumb finds the support under the mastoid process, aren't my hands now finding support and supporting the whole area all the way down into her mid-neck? Her head is now lifted in a completely different place. Yeah. So I've now supported her in such a way that my hands, but now I have another very delicate process. You watch the difference, but first of all, you see how simple that is. Watch my legs, watch my spine, watch my head sinking, lifting, sinking, lifting. It's not just my hands. Everything in myself, even this tiny movement, comes from within. Yeah? But you watch, as soon as I come back to here, and I start to support her here, is she as comfortable? Are you as comfortable in what you see? Yeah, okay. So you watch, as soon as I change so that I've supported her under the mastoid process, yeah? So that her head is balancing in my hands. What does it mean balancing? Because where's the point? So if I'm going to lift her, if my hands are too far forward, what's going to happen to the top of her head? It's going to fall back. Yeah? If my hands are too far back, what's going to happen? So I now, if I'm going to ask for another way of lifting, then I have to have the ability to organize how her head balances rather than how I hold it. Yeah? Now, let's see if I meet the criterion by which I have the availability of every direction from here. Okay? Because obviously, if I'm here, lateral bending is going to be a pain in the ass, isn't it? I can laterally bend her, and we do all the time, but it's certainly not going to be the kind of lateral bending where I can be up here at the highest point under the mastoid process. Huh. Look at the difference in what's available in lateral bending. Yeah? In which I have the bony prominence under my hand and the subtle change with the movement of the in my hand, I have lateral bending. Okay? Do I have the ability to make the nodding movement by sliding my hands backwards and forwards? She's now nodding her head, isn't she? Right? If I just slightly lift myself, now don't I have forward translation? And if I just slightly change the intention onto the mastoid process for my thumb, don't I have lateral translation? Can I get lateral translation from here? Shearing, yeah? The moment I try to make lateral translation from here, are you comfortable in yourself? No. But if I can make it from here, you sense as I make this movement. This is exactly what we did before. We lifted the foot and carried it, didn't we? We pushed across. I'm making the movement from this hand over to the other side. Yeah? So now I have lateral translation. Yeah? Can I make rolling? How will I make rolling? Here comes my pelvis. Watch how the underhand rolls underneath, the upper hand rolls over. I can make rolling, can't I? Now, if I want to rotate, the underhand slides under. Same movement with my pelvis. Same movement with my pelvis. Yeah? I can make traction here. Yeah? Because I'm already hooked on the point of the skull that I can invite the traction to come. The only movement I can't make is compression. So I got most of them, right? And I can make the compression easily by simply changing where this hand is to support, and then I can change my hand for compression. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So, within yourself, have you discovered another rationale for on what basis will you go about lifting a person's head? Yeah. If you were to sit and think about this, and you were to think, how could I be in the position, this most simple position, where all of the potential exists or doesn't exist within a person? Where would I be able to feel to find whether they're available or not? And a lot of times the availability isn't there because my support doesn't give them the support. They must maintain the tone to hold their own neck. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. The very first thing, we're going to take the time to slide our hand under and begin to fit our hand, the thenar eminence, or this thumb pad, and you take your time and you sense with your fingertips, I'll get over there. I'll get there. You sense with your fingertips, and you very consciously, you look at the thenar eminence, you look and you feel this, and for the moment, you bring the thenar eminence to this point. And I can guarantee to you that within the first moment, most of you will find the mastoid process up here. I'll come around the room, and no matter how clear I make this, your hands will go to there. So to actually find out how to find the support of this part of your hand underneath. Yeah? And you slowly turn the head so that your hand can actually rest underneath for a moment. Okay? Then on the other side, we come here and we in our eminence, mastoid process. Where is it that I can place my hand underneath behind the mastoid process so that I could hold it? I could hold her head in this point. I could change my hands and hold her head without her name tag in this point. I can get to the place where I can go back and forth to one place of balancing. Now, this is getting a little carried away, right? Your hands will have to marry themselves underneath, and it'll change relative to each person. And once you make this movement, then you can play for a moment with the subtle movement of where's balance. How do I lift her chin? How do I lift her forehead? As I draw my hands to me, I roll my pelvis under. As I take my hands away, I find the equal and opposite support, so I'm playing with this balance. Yeah? So that I think of where would I have the ability to balance her head so that if I want to lift her, I could lift her directly forward without having her head drop back or her chin lift or her chin to drop. If I'm too far back, now I want to be able to lift her into every single potential place. But for the time being, we just simply work to find the support underneath and the sense of balance. Now, most of you will not be able to sit over the table like this. Yeah. And this whole way of sitting has huge properties and questions, and especially in regards to the Me Too movement and all these kind of things. Because here I have her head in my crotch. Let's just be straightforward here, okay? So the question, but I still have to be organized in such a way that I am in the place where I'm going to be able to have the greatest amount of support possible. If my intention is absolutely clean, it's not even a question, right? It doesn't even, the support that's given is such a profound quality that the person goes, okay, I'm safe, yeah? But you have to be relative to the environment. Women with men, men with women, you have to be very, very clear about your intention in this relationship. Now, because I have this advantage, it's easy for me to come close enough because I want to have this weight here. The further out that I go, the more that the tone will change at the top of her spine. Yeah? So we have some real questions. The people that are really flexible oftentimes they'll force themselves to have this width, and then they'll come and they'll lean forward and they'll be more or less okay. Yeah. Now, I don't know what you're going to do in your practice. Yeah, you're going to have to evolve this for yourself. I want to invite you to think in terms of, in practicing for myself, what is the clearest way what's the principle? And then what am I willing to give up? Because we all are going to have to give up something unless you grow to be my height. Yeah, there will be some way in which you're going to give up something. You're going to give up the distance a little bit. You're going to give up the support. But the question is for you to think, how am I going to arrange myself to have the greatest set of possibilities and to be so sensitive that I can sense? Because I can tell you in time, you'll be able to tell immediately when a person's had a whiplash. The moment you lift their head, you'll sense whether there's a whiplash. Just like when I showed with his ankle, that there's a difference between one and the other, the thickness or the way that the movement wasn't elastic. You'll find the exact same thickness in the way that a person has maintained the process to protect themselves. Yeah? All right, so for our practice, and again, this will not be perfect, so please understand that, but just so we can understand the principles of practice, please turn yourself onto the diagonal, bring your head to either corner. You can bring it to this corner or that one. Okay, so for my practice, there's not a person here who can't sit here. Now, this came about in Brisbane many years ago, when I was an assistant trainer and I was watching the practicums. And in the practicum was this little woman, maybe 4'9", with a profound hunchback, who'd been a physical therapist for at least 9 million years. And I was watching her get ready for her practicum. And here she was, kind of tottering. I think she was 80. And she was kind of just tottering around. And it was so cute. And she was in this hunchback. And she comes over here and she goes and she puts down her stool. And she's, oh, my feet are too big. Oh. So she's got the stool and she makes sure everything's flat. And then she kind of totters away. She comes over here. And she kind of looks around and she grabs another stool. And then she kind of comes over here, and then she puts her stool down, and I'm going, what in the world is she doing? Yeah. So she then has, can I have a small little pad or something with the height of this? There must be some little pad. This will work. This is good enough for the time being, more or less the height. Yeah. So then the first thing she does, she has the person resting here. Now I went, holy cow. Now that makes complete sense. Okay, so now what's the advantage of this? Obviously, she could get close. What's the disadvantage? Hmm? Well, if I was really careful, okay, you're close. You're really close. Because the person, keep going on that thought. It feels funny, but for what reason does it feel funny? No, it's not. The space. She doesn't have the sense of her head. Her head is now floating in space in a different way. So she's having to anticipate whether she's supported in the same way. Now, of course, if I come here and I make this really a cozy place to be, maybe that'll disappear, but it may still be resting for her. Yeah. We don't have enough stools to do this. Yeah. Now, I was teaching in Switzerland, and in the room, after I'd seen this thing with this woman, in the room was a piano bench that was exactly the height of the table. And it was so interesting because I took the piano bench, and the piano bench was as wide as the table and the height of the table. And if you take then and you took the piano bench and turned it lengthwise to the table, you have a perfect relationship. And so I came back the next year, and every single practitioner had built themselves a perfect bench for the size of their table. And they were working so they could slide their pelvis from side to side. They weren't on a stool, and they would turn the stool so that when they wanted to do something with their head and neck, that they would just have the piano bench. In fact, they didn't have one, they had two, because then they would have a bench that was the size, the leg could go over, the arm could go over. So they built these props, these extensions to the table. So it's ingenious, okay? But we don't have enough stools for that, so please slide back on the table. Move back to the angle. Just suggestions and ways that you can be as bright and as intelligent and this little, I mean really a gnome of a woman, so that you can come, lift, find the mastoid process, bring your hands underneath, find the mastoid process. Now here my hands are large, so it's a question of how will my hands marry? How do I bring my hands up and into? And so I have to find the marriage of my hands relative to the shape of her head. Yeah? So my hands, when I made that movement, are married. And here's this and here's this, resting under the mastoid process. Okay? So go and play with this initial thing, and then once you find this, just for the moment, make the very first movement. With her, I like to be here for whatever reason, and then make the tiniest movement of sliding your hands in such a way that her chin comes up and her forehead drops down. Sliding your hands into the place where you have a sense that her head becomes in balance, and then make the lift within yourself as if to bring her head completely forward and back translation. The chin not first, the forehead not first, just lifting and sinking. Okay? It's a lot. This is a lot. But this can give you a world of connection and a world of sensitivity to working with a person's head that will make your work absolutely superior in the future. Okay? All right? All very clear? All right, so go give yourself the very first attempt at this. Thank you.